Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to be calling this meeting to order. So welcome to our regular meeting of Health, Education, and Neighborhood Council Committee, and it is Tuesday, October 24th at 1:03 p.m. and we're in City Hall, room 1010. And I want to, my colleague will be joining me in the next couple of minutes, but I'd like to start the meeting. And while we don't have quorum, but I want to remind everyone who wants to fill out a comment card, please fill it out. And we do have one comment card. I want to open up public comment. If I could have Ida Tala. Hi, Ida. Come on up.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on an issue that I feel your help is needed to address, and that is the needs of older seniors, those who perhaps are 75 years old and onwards. They are often a neglected group. And today we had a wonderful presentation on food in all its goodness and the wonderful responsibility we each have. I would like to say that the needs of older seniors exceeds that, perhaps. Our digestion is not what it was, and therefore there are different needs, and we need to explore that. And I would ask you all to look into this matter and improve congregate meals.
Thank you, Ida. Thank you. Thank you, Herb. Let the record reflect we have quorum now. Councilmember Herb Weston has joined the meeting. And I'd like to call up Spindler. I'll give you 3 minutes for you sign up for every single item and public comment. 3 minutes including your public comment.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. So, evidence-based program contracts. They're spending a lot of money up there. I just came down from Chavez Ravine, and I bet them LAPD spend a lot of extra overtime money on that evidence-based program you've got with them. They haven't even opened up the parking lot to the goddamn Dodger Stadium. They got people lined up and people getting out of their cars, walking in traffic. And what are you guys doing? Not a fucking thing about it. Evidence-based program proves that the LAPD is not getting reimbursed by the Dodgers. We're just paying for all this fucking overtime for these Dodgers. You know, and I'm a little upset today because I forgot my puppet, so I'm going to have to do my best because my puppet had some things to say about this. Now, you got number 2, potential environmental impacts on sites, chromium-6. Chromium-6 is some dangerous fucking shit. You do not want chromium-6 near human beings. But, again, the city is too interested in me. They're not interested in chromium-6. They're too interested in what I do. They're not interested in chromium-6. So now you got chromium-6 along with hepatitis A, trying to kill all of us before we reach our 50th birthday. I know some of you are old enough, you know, not to give a fuck about your 50th, but I'd like to make it there. Chromium-6 killing everybody, killing your children, killing your neighbors because of the city council. Number 3, the disabled placard parking reform. I've had a change of heart about this. Now, originally, I was in favor of it, but I got to talking to some of our county and city workers, and they get a doctor's letter for like $200, and they get one of these placards so they can park for free. I'm in support of the continued abuse of the placard parking going on in LA, and I know Councilman Weston definitely supports this because, as you know, all of Jackie Lacey's inspectors working in the public integrity unit all get free parking by DOT. Did you know that? No, you didn't know that. And then the rest that aren't lucky enough to know Jackie Lacey, they get a disabled parking permit and they park all the way on Broadway, all the way on Hill, all the way up and down Grand, all the way down Los Angeles Street, all the way to Alameda for free. So you can have free parking. So I came up with a little jingle for everybody. All you have to do is fake a disability, and then you get free parking forever, because Herb Watson doesn't give a fucking, David Rue doesn't give a fucking fuck you, and finally, go Dodgers!
Thank you. Seeing there's no more cards, general public comment and multiple agenda item comments has now been heard. I'd like to move over to item number 1, which is basically a standard Department of Aging transmittal. And I propose, Councilman Weston, if we could move this on to CAO's recommendation on consent?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Move that on consent. Item number 2. Item number 2 is regarding chromium-6 and the potential health risk in LA due to recent finding of its airborne variants. However, the report is almost complete. And
Disrupting the meeting. And look, you're disrupting.
thank you, Mr. Wesson. Mr. Spindler, let the record show that Mr. Spindler is disrupting the meeting. Mr. Spindler, that'll be your first and final warning.
No.
You're disrupting again. You're disrupting again. Please, Mr. Spindler.
No, you're disrupting now.
One more.
Disrupting now.
Let the records reflect. Thank you, Mr. Wesson. Let the records reflect that he's continually disrupting. One more outburst, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Thank you. The report is not yet complete, and I was hoping to hear it in the full report today. So we're going to continue the item for 30 days and hear it at our November meeting when we have crucial experts from AQMD to also attend. But before we continue this item, I just wanted to. Well, we're just going to continue it for 30 days. Okay.
Item number 3.
And item number 3, yes, Mr. CLA, can you read that into the record, please?
Yes. Los Angeles Department of Transportation report relative to the California disabled placard parking reform. This item has also been referred to the Transportation Committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. CLA, Mr. Powell. Mr. Weston, this is a Department of Transportation and Department of Disability Working Group report regarding the California disabled placard parking reform. I read the report, lots of great things in there, very excited about it, much needed. If I could invite Stephen Simons from the Department of Disability and Ken Hustings from Department of Transportation up to the table to present the report and its recommendations.
Good afternoon.
Again, Stephen Simon, City of LA Department on Disability, Executive Director, joined by Ken Husting, Principal Transportation Engineer at DOT and the Parking Administrator. And also we've asked Andrew Conway to join us. He's the California DMV Deputy Director. Proceed. So I wanted to give you a little, joint department background on this committee's work and very specific recommendations that this committee is making to council. By way of background, back in 2015, we had a parking reform working group that made several recommendations to council that include a lot of recommendations around how we handle parking placard reform. CLA asked us to hold up a little bit until DOT and the disability community could work a little more closely with our partners at DOD, DOT, and DMV. And so we spent a year and a half, Salida Reynolds and I, the department heads from both departments, got together. We convened a panel that we chaired. DMV was at the table, Caltrans at the table, and a majority of participants in that organization, in that working group were members of the disability community. So we got the input we needed, we felt, to move forward and make some revisions to those recommendations. Core items, and Ken's going to go through a very specific list of 10 recommendations that we have for you, but core items that came up that got a lot of discussion were around a two-tier system. How do we decide who is appropriate to be getting either extended time at meters or not having to pay at meters? And to be honest with you, initially when the recommendations were out a couple years earlier, I wasn't thrilled with them, but we spent a lot of time asking disability advocates, getting a lot of data, and I think we've come up with a really, really balanced plan here. I want to give you the short version because I can keep talking. So I actually want to flip it over to Ken to give you some more detail about the 10 recommendations that our committee came up with.
So just real briefly, what I want to do is talk about what the group did. So the group was tasked with coming up with a consensus if there is actually a problem. So we didn't want to find solutions for something that people don't think there's a problem. So that's the first thing. The next thing is we want to create goals and criteria for solutions to the problem, again, if there is a problem. And third, to evaluate and propose a broad set of solutions that would address the problem. So the committee was presented with hard data that LADOT has from our LA Express Park program. And that data captured through parking meters, paid data, as well as parking sensors that are in the ground. We were able to show that we have over 40% of people that don't pay for parking in downtown LA and also Hollywood. And about 80% of those are disabled placards. So the other portions could be people violating the law, could be city vehicles that are exempt from paying, just a number of things, but just a huge portion does not pay for parking in LA. It's even higher in Westwood. We have data that shows from UCLA that's over 50% that don't pay for parking in Westwood. And so that really undermines our ability to do demand-based parking pricing and make a change to create more parking availability for all users. So the committee agreed based on the data that was presented, and there's a number of examples of misuse and unintended consequences of the existing policies. So they agreed that there was a problem that needed addressing. So after holding meetings between July 2016 and April 2017, the committee reached a consensus on the following recommendations, which we believe will improve access for all users. So the first one is a marketing campaign on the implications of misusing placards. I think a lot of times people just don't understand without the placard. You can't take the placard of who it's issued to and just go ahead and use it just because you're a family member. Some people know that's illegal. Some people may think, well, it's issued to this household. They may have had this misunderstanding. So I think an important component is marketing campaign to let people know what is the law, what can you do, what can you not do. The second thing is to clarify placard certifiers. So we had a medical professional that was on the committee, and so he was able to point out that there is a little bit of ambiguity when it comes to issuing the placards. And also the committee felt that there's maybe a little too much discretion of who could issue the placards. And so I think there's an opportunity to maybe be a little bit more restrictive. Maybe chiropractors shouldn't be doing it. Maybe it should just be limited to licensed doctors, physicians. And so there's other professions on there that were a little questionable, so I think this is an opportunity to work on. But perhaps the most controversial, but also in my professional opinion as a parking administrator, what could actually change parking the most, in my opinion, is the two-tier system. So this is what Stephen Simon was referring to earlier. And so what the two-tier system is, it's creating one tier that is for those with severe disability and mobility impairments. So this is for people that have limited ability to walk, they have limited ability to reach, they are restricted to use of a mobility device, or they just lack motor control of their feet or hands or anything to their extremities. And so these people would continue to have the benefits that they have now, which is unlimited parking, and they don't pay for anything. And that is extremely important that they continue to have those benefits. Now, there is a second tier that is for all the others. So that'd be somebody that, say, for instance, has a bad back, is able to qualify for a placard, but there's no reason why they can't pay for parking and can't be subject to time limits. It could be somebody that has, a bad toe. Again, they walk right past the meter, but they could go ahead and pay for parking. So it creates this two-tier system. So other cities and states have implemented this system, such as Portland and Chicago. But one of the most recent examples is Portland, where they had 8 to 10% of the people that were eligible for the disabled placards. After they went to the two-tier system, only 1% actually qualified for the top tier, and the remainder was actually the second tier. And where areas in downtown Portland, and they have a great graphic, I'm sorry I'm not able to show that, but they have this great graphic where they show 30% of the occupied areas actually went down to 7% occupancy. So areas about 1/3 of the city, heavily occupied, just dropped down to 7% after that law went into effect. So that's probably one of the biggest things. But there's more recommendations. Another one would be longer time limit at blue zones. So if we did actually create this second tier, we'd have blue zones where the people that are on the second tier would pay for parking. They'd still be able to park in a blue zone, but they would have an ADA accessible device where they pay for parking, and they'd be subject to time limits. Those time limits can vary. We could actually be very generous with those time limits. So another one is direct the revenue from a two-tier system to be used for accessibility improvements. I think the entire committee felt very strongly about this one. So because, let me give you a perspective. In downtown LA alone, based on people not paying for parking, we're losing about at least $6 million a year in revenue of people not paying for parking. That's just downtown LA alone. So if you take it to the city, it's probably into double digits. So what we're looking to do is, if the system actually went into a place at the state level, money that is generated as a result of this change in policy, the difference from 1 year to the next, that money would be dedicated specifically for accessibility improvements. And when we talk about accessibility improvements, it's related to parking. So say, for instance, we're going to be creating these blue zones. We're going to need money to paint those blue zones. We need to make them ADA accessible. That's a number of accessibility ramps, areas where we have to maintain clearance so that people that actually make use of a van, larger vehicle to help them get to the sidewalk would have that ability. They would have the amenities that they need to be able to make use of the public right-of-way. The next one was to increase the number of blue zones to at least 4% of the metered spaces. Now, 4% doesn't sound like a lot, but right now we have none. And the reason that we have none is because right now disabled placard users can park anywhere on street, well, anywhere that there's a metered space on street for unlimited time. So if we were more restrictive, we'd create at least one, what it comes down to would be one blue zone per block face. And so that's one blue zone per block. So that would mean that one is dedicated specifically for the people that need the accessibility. And again, right now we don't have any. What we do have blue zones in residential areas, but now we're talking about citywide in the central business districts. Another recommendation was to increase the number of accessible spaces in off-street facilities. So the committee felt that while we do provide per code.
Ken, I'm sorry. I want to give you ample time for your report, but if I could interrupt for 1 second,
Yeah,
because
no problem.
actually I do have 2 public comment cards, and one of them has to leave, but I really want to hear his testimony.
He has a Dodger game to go to, so that's important.
So do I.
But he has some handicap accessibility issue, and I wonder why he wants to go to the Dodger game. Is something going on today? Yes, if we could have Fernando Gil from UCLA here, who is also part of the working group as well. Want to give him 2 minutes to. Sorry about that, Ken.
No problem.
Thank you very much, and excuse my informal attire. The gates open at 2 at Dodger Stadium, and thank you. And the handicap parking spaces are quite limited at Dodger Stadium, and if I don't get there right when it opens, I would say at least 80% of those that use the handicap parking places at Dodger Stadium are physically able and can run to their seats. So I need to get there right away. But I just bring that up because I support this report fully. I was honored to be a member of the committee throughout its entire process. I'm a professor at UCLA, but I've also been active with the disability rights movement. I was President Obama's appointee as vice chair of the National Council on Disability, and also President Clinton's appointee as the Assistant Secretary for Aging. So I just mentioned that because the issues for older persons as we live longer and face chronic conditions and limitations, the issue for persons with disability as we struggle to maintain our mobility is really part and parcel of this report. And this report can go a long ways towards increasing the options and opportunities for people like ourselves. I won't go through the thousands of stories of abuse that's brought out in here. I do want to emphasize that what cities like Los Angeles can do to deal with the problem, certainly every item in this report, but the two-tier one in particular can have an immediate impact to reduce both the flagrant abuse of handicap placards, to make more parking places available for those with mobility limitations, and if we can be kind of Philistine about it, to
Go ahead, sir.
lower the cost that the city loses in revenue by those who take up those parking places. So I thank you for the chance just to support this report, to represent the disability community with mobility limitations, to thank my colleagues and the members of the Advisory Council. I've been working closely with the state legislature. They're waiting for the big cities to come forward, and the big cities include San Francisco and Los Angeles. San Francisco is moving in our direction. If Los Angeles City can go before the state legislature with these kind of recommendations, I think we can move fairly quickly towards some state legislative action. So thank you very much, and we're hoping Kershaw does really good today.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I want to take advantage of you while you're here. I was going to ask the question later, but I have a concern where relates, I think there's probably a need to ensure that the right folk and the qualified people have the right to issue the permit. But I was just curious, how would you pare that down? I heard, I want to say a reference to chiropractors. Mm-hmm. You know, chiropractors get a bad rap. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I'm just, how would you go about that piece? How would we reduce who could issue or who's qualified? And I wanted to hear it from your perspective.
If I can just present it as kind of two sides of a coin, there are those, especially the disability advocates in San Francisco, that would focus more on scrutinizing those who issue the placards, physicians, nurse practitioners, chiropractors. And they would focus on enforcement and expanding the number of available spaces for handicap placards. The reality, Councilman, is that the reality is that the state departments don't have the manpower or the person power. Law enforcement has many other more important things to deal with, and expanding the number of parking places takes away from what merchants and other citizens will need. But in terms of who issues them, health professionals, we put them in a quandary. It's difficult for them to say to a longtime client or patient, no, you can't have a handicap placard. So personally, and it's not in the report, I'm not sure if our efforts are going to be efficient on that end.
Gotcha.
I believe we'll have a greater impact with the recommendations we made, especially with the two-tier.
That's where I was going to go next, because I share those concerns. I think it's the thought makes sense to look into who has the power to issue these permits. I just think you could open up a can of worms when you're trying to really sort out who can do it and who not. But this two-tiered system really caught my attention. And just on the surface, it would appear that would have a very fast, positive result. And I wanted you to weigh in on that.
Absolutely. Actually, Professor Don Shoup from UCLA and myself have proposed this. And it's kind of one of our babies. But as the report brought out, and my colleagues, the experts here, those states that have implemented the two-tier have essentially seen a dramatic reductions in requests for handicap placards because we have taken away the motivation. You no longer get the privilege. The only two criteria, and this is something that I'll state at the state legislature, and I believe it's in our report, that if we move to a two-tier system, for those that meet these more stringent conditions of physical and mobility limitations, that A, they continue to receive the free parking, unlimited time, and that the revenues we might save come back to the disability community or have the city use it to enhance accessibility for persons with mobility and other disability limitations. That way it's a win-win.
I like that.
So,
Thank you.
thank you all. And
Thank you,
Yes.
Fernando. Thank you. No, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, and I just want the record to reflect that actually Professor Fernando Gil was part of the working group, so which is what to allow for more time. So thank you so much.
and appreciate you.
And go Dodgers.
Very much.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
Up to the game.
See you, sir.
And Mr. Wesson and panelists, if you don't mind, while we're on the public comment, if I could have Saeed Zadeh, who is the chair of Caltrans Disability Commission, also come up and give us 2 minutes of testimony as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Syed Trabzadeh. I'm an engineer working at Caltrans. I'm also a chairperson of the Disability Advisory Committee in District 7, Caltrans office. I had the honor of being one of the members of the committee who came up with this report. And I'm here to just express my full support for this report. Not as a member of the committee, but as a person with severe disability. I'm a quadriplegic as a result of a gymnastic accident. I have a van which has been modified for wheelchair ramps and also a very sophisticated hand control system. If I want to tell you what I go through every day when I just go, I live in Santa Monica area near Westwood. What I have to go through to find a parking spot, just to go, for a doctor's appointment or just do a little shopping. And the abuse of the disabled parking that I see every day. It's unbelievable. And as one of the issues that I brought up in our meeting was to start with how easy it is for people to just get that recommendation or that letter from the physician and take it to DMV. Once it gets to DMV, they have to issue the parking permit for them. But we need to address the problem there where, people, doctors who issue that letter for their families or, whoever they like. So I think the abuse has to start from there. This report addresses all these issues, and I highly request and beg you to approve it because it's all for a good cause. And it has a lot of good suggestions in this report.
Thank you, Mr. Saeed. And
For giving me the opportunity.
yes, thank you, Mr. Saeed. And again, let the record reflect that Mr. Saeed was also a member of the working task force. I appreciate that. Thank you so very much. Thank you for your service on that. You know what? Just for the sake of continuity, I'm just going to do one more comment card. Gary Forsythe from the Neighbor Hills West, North Hills, right?
We know this.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hi,
Council.
Gary. Let's give him 2 minutes.
Gary Fordyce, North Hills West Neighborhood Council. I will just be a moment. If I might request clarification from these gentlemen, I didn't hear specificity on certain categories such as heart attacks. Stroke is a little easier because that becomes visible. Knees, hips, heart attacks are not very obvious to the general public or officers. So I just thought it was not mentioned. That's all.
Thank you, Gary. And I think it's partially because we interrupted mid presentation, and I know this is going to be a working group, and I have a couple of questions, but I want you to finish. But with 30 to 40%, with 30 to 40% of people not paying for parking, and using handicap placards, this is not just an issue of revenue, but it's obviously an issue of access, especially for handicapped personnel. But I want you to finish your presentation because we both have a couple of questions.
No
Go ahead.
problem, no problem. And so continuing off, we talked about the 4% of meter spaces would have blue zones, and then also to increase the number of accessible spaces in off-street facilities. So right now we do, by code, provide accessible spaces in our parking facilities, but I think there was a request from the group to increase that number. So that's something that either the city could do or we can lobby at a larger space, but that's definitely something the city can do. And next one is to create and install accessible meters and payment technology. So again, if we create these blue zones, we would make our parking meters accessible at those blue zones, and also to continue to invest in technology that would be allowed to have, say for instance, where the vehicle pulls up and you don't really have to do anything, it pays for parking, expanding our pay by cell, so increasing the ways that you can pay for parking for those with disabilities. The next one is to increase the citation amount for accessible parking violations. Currently, our parking violations are $363. There's an administrative change that we can make to very easily increase it to $100 more to $463. And even the city of San Francisco, I believe their citation is around $1,000. So it's much higher than ours.
Can I ask?
Sure.
I wanted to ask about the fines and citations, but not so much for a driver who slips in and, what happens to a authorized physician that issues a false permit? Is there a fine for them? I think it was you that talked about physicians who might give one to their whole family. So I was curious, is there a levy, a fine?
So I'll defer to Deputy Director Conway.
Hi, Andrew Conway from the Department of Motor Vehicles. We have teams of investigators and also peace officers out there. If they come across that as a crime, they can charge the physician with a crime, and there are fines and whatnot associated with that. In addition, the medical board will be able to conduct a review of the physician's activities, the chiropractor's activities, whoever it is, the various licensing boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs. And we work with them to refer licensees for action and investigation. I'm currently actually working on an interagency agreement with all of the various medical boards in the state to pledge to act appropriately upon it and investigate cases that we put forward to them.
The city has no ability to, let's say if it's a doctor within our
From a city license perspective?
Just curious.
I can't say that the city, and I can't speak for LAPD, I know parking enforcement would not go after the doctors. They just would not do that kind of level of investigation. LAPD, I don't know.
What typically will happen is if we receive a tip that a certain act was related to the provider, we would then run an analysis of all of the records that provider is associated with in our files and hand all of that over to the licensing board. And if the licensing board sees a pattern of that kind of behavior, they would be inclined to maybe suspend that practice or at least put the doctor on probation and have a significant impact on their practice.
I think we should jam the heck out of them. And that the city could create a small task force. You stop somebody, they have a legitimate placard, you know if they're legit or not. Anyway, I would definitely be supportive of increasing the ticket price and some kind of expedited way to fine physicians or what have you. It just sounds that's a little complicated, not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
But a little complicated.
It's very complicated. One of the biggest issues is that complaints of pain are so subjective that a lot of doctors will say that they were fooled by the patient. The patient says he can't stand up. I can't really evaluate whether or not that's true. That's what we hear.
I get that. Thank you for saying it, Sharon.
Yeah. So this kind of dovetails into the last recommendation, which everybody felt very strongly as a key component, but is not necessarily the solution, which is to improve parking enforcement. So it's not talking about improving the productivity or the capability of our officers, but being able to give them the resources to expand the enforcement and continue to do what they do. So just to give you an idea, in 2016, our parking enforcement conducted over 206 stings. They cited over 1,800 folks, and they confiscated 836 placards. And this is just a drop in the bucket. And so, there's not enough money for us to stay on top when it comes to enforcement. Because the parking enforcement officer has to be there when the driver is there. So even though we know many cases of where people are abusing, unless the driver is actually there to where they can match up their identification with that placard, there's nothing you can do. So those are the recommendations, and with that, we'll be happy to take any additional questions.
I actually had a footnote that come out of some of both of your questions. So, DOD's role, my personal role in this, is to ensure that any reform is implemented in a way that doesn't place the primary burden on people with disabilities who are in need of a placard. And so when I think we started this a year and a half ago, we were very concerned about some of the recommendations. So I come back to your two-tier system. I am a full supporter of it. I sit here as a full supporter of it. It has to be done right, though. And I'm always cautioning on how easy it is to look at data and say, wow, the number of placard applications went down 70, 80%. The number of people with placards went down 70, 80%. That's a good thing. It might be a good thing. It's good because less people are taking those spaces up if that's your ultimate goal. But we don't know in that data how many people were committing fraud that we just got out of the system, yay, or how many people legitimately needed a placard and felt a barrier to getting one. So that always concerns me. So that said, I come back to this recommendation. I support this report because there are 10 recommendations here, not just a two-tier. What we did is look at the two-tier. Like the gentleman's question from the audience, we really looked at who should be in which tier very closely from models from other states, and I think have come up with the best balance that I've seen here, so I again support that. And the other 9 recommendations, for the most part, at least 7 of them, are around what are the other things the city can do to make sure there's enough accessible parking elsewhere to make this reasonable and applicable. So I need to always go on record and say that. I know it makes my friends at DOT a little nervous when I start to go there. But ultimately, this report addresses all of those issues and addresses the needs of the people from the community who said we're very concerned about it.
And I will say that this whole process, working with this committee, has been very eye-opening. Me as an engineer from Department of Transportation, seeing the perspective from my colleagues over at the Department on Disability, from the people that have the disabilities, to understand what they need, what are hurdles they have to face every single day, and how we can find a broad set of solutions to help make their lives better. And I believe that we've struck a very good balance with what's here in the report.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the informative report. I thought the report was fantastic as well. This is a long time coming, much needed. I just want to ask a basic question. It's obvious, but for the record, what were the level of support for these recommendations across the various different stakeholders?
It was high. There's a matrix. Somebody was hired third party to come in and really break down the kind of numbers. I don't have it in front of me.
I don't have it in front of me.
I'm sure strong support across the board, right?
Yes. It was strong support. I'd say on many of the items it was unanimous, and some of them it might have just been a consensus, but I know that by and large, I'd say over 80%.
Right. And if you were to scale, was it a 1 to 5 scale we had on a lot of them?
1 to 5 scale.
On a 1 to 5 scale, I don't know that anything made it in these top 10 recommendations that didn't have majority 4s and 5s, or 1s and 2s, depending on which way we had flipped it.
Yeah. So anything that was, borderline did drop off.
Okay.
Because we actually considered, this is just the top 10 that we felt strongly about. There was dozens of other recommendations that we considered that never made it.
So next steps, going forward, are any of the recommendations proposed for implementation today, or does the state need to first adopt a two-tiered system before we implement any of these recommendations locally?
There are things that we can do today. Really, we're looking at this holistically when the state was able to make a legislative change for the two-tier, but there are things the city can take. For instance, if we want to do a marketing campaign right now to talk about the abuse or misuse, just how people understand, that's something that we can do. When it comes to let's see, increasing the number of accessible spaces in off-street facilities. That's something that we can do with, I believe, our building and safety now. Creating and install accessible meters and payment technology. I know my parking meters division is continuing to push the boundaries as far as technology and make our parking meters accessible to everybody. Matter of fact, we're in the process of upgrading our pay stations across the city to make it multilingual, to make it just easier to understand and use. The citation amount, increasing that's something that's very easy for us to do. We could probably even get done, I'd say, by early next year, maybe even if we're really aggressive by the end of this year. Then also improve parking enforcement. Going through the budget, maybe dedicating more resources, or it could just be saying that we're going to increase the number of stings. And I know my general manager feels very strongly this number of stings has increased very steadily over the past few years. So we went from, I'd say, probably double digits to triple digits to where we're increasing every year, and I think that we continue to increase even next year. And also even dedicating some of the revenue for accessibility improvements. As we move towards making the city more accessible, we should be able to take some of that revenue and work on those accessible ramps. But really, for the revenue that we're envisioning is when the two-tier system goes into place, the revenue that would be generated or saved could be directed directly towards that. So there's a number of things that we can take now.
So the Tier 1 and Tier 2 system hasn't been defined yet, or is that we have to wait for the state to define it?
The state
The
has,
state, yeah.
They
That's the
haven't defined it yet,
the
right?
state has to authorize local jurisdictions to do it.
Okay.
So something that I want to point out is that the city of San Francisco tried to go at this alone, and they were not successful.
Okay.
Really, people are looking to LA to take the lead. We are in communication with San Francisco. San Francisco is looking to LA, and I think together, as Professor Gill had mentioned, for the two big cities to take the lead. I have multiple times heard from adjoining cities and other cities across California saying that this is a problem for them, but they can't do anything because they feel LA needs to take a leadership role. So that's why we're doing this now.
What does that mean, Mr. Chairman, LA take a leadership role?
I think what they're looking for LA to give the thoughtful, comprehensive approach that we did through this report by getting disabled advocates to come up with a set of solutions to the problem and be able to push that forward, because a lot of other cities don't have the resources, they don't have the pull that we have to get a committee together.
Is it necessary to have some kind of legislation to make this happen?
It's
So
Have we identified possible folk to carry this legislation? Because if we wanted to do this, Mr. Chair, we could do it. We could incorporate San Francisco. Maybe the League of Cities would even get behind.
So I understand that there is a state senator that is very interested in moving forward, but we cannot promote this report on behalf of the city because city council
So actually,
has
so
not
you
endorsed it.
preempted my question, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wesson. Actually, yes, we were going to, as part of adopting this report, we were going to instruct the Department of Transportation to work with our lobbyists to help push this reform. And I was going to ask him, what does that look like? Yeah. And that's the same question. No, that's great. Which senator?
I believe it's Senator Allen.
Oh, Ben Allen. Great.
so
Yeah.
heard.
Great. Yeah. So,
You need an influential operative. He's good.
and I guess once the Tier 1 and 2 system gets passed by the state, that's where it will answer questions like what what Gary Forsythe asked about. What mandates Tier 1? What mandates Tier 2? What kind of disabilities? Right.
There is a description in the report.
There is? Okay.
Yeah, if I may, the focus in two tiers has really been upon the capabilities of an individual, not the underlying condition. Because really, underlying conditions can have various forms of how you animate them in a person. So the idea is, for example, if they're not able to manipulate coins, if they're not able to reach a certain number of inches, if their chair prevents them from being a certain number of inches off of the ground, then that would be a qualifying set of conditions that, regardless of whatever the underlying medical condition is, it's the capability of the individual to work in the environment of a parking meter or a parking place that defines whether or not they would be in that second tier.
I have two action items, but Mr. Weston, do you have any further questions? No. Then the two action items I have is I want to adopt this report and instruct DOT to work with our state lobbyists to help push for this reform. But also, secondarily, I would like for DOT and Office of Disability to work with to have some sort of report back on what Mr. Wesson was talking about basically coming up with some sort of reporting mechanism for LAPD and DOT to possibly collaborate with the state DMV on reporting. I mean, if we could ticket, great. If we could ticket abuses, that is. But at the very minimum, getting that information to the DMV so that they can go ahead and prosecute and go after both doctors and everyone else involved. So some sort of, how would that system look like? And what we have to do on our end. If we could enforce it ourselves, great. But if it looks like we can't, but that's the report that we would like back. As well as, I guess, a motion on, since we don't have to wait for the state, you're saying a part of this recommendations can be implemented now. If you could help us draft that and see what that looks like.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, Mr. Wesson. Thank you. And we already fulfilled all the comment cards on this. Seeing there's no more public comment, we'll adopt to move these recommendations, this report, and as directed by the two action items. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there is no other business before us, so this meeting is adjourned. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. Thank you.